Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this Race to Zero Climate and Health Dialogues with this session focused on transport. My name is Audrey de Nazelle. I'm a senior lecturer and the Deputy Director of the Centre for Environmental Policy at Imperial College in London, and I have the great pleasure to be moderating this session for you today. So we have a great lineup of speakers for the next hour and a half, and I'll be introducing them to you as we go along. We will also have, in about an hour's time, an opportunity for you, all of you, to ask your questions. We will be doing that through the chat, actually not through the Q&A box. You should see in your Zoom window Q&A. So if you'd like me to ask you questions to the speakers, please post your questions on the Q&A box in your Zoom, and I will pass them on. So make sure they're clear and concise, as I'm the one who will be asking them myself. So also please make sure that you communicate as much as you can through your social media outlets. There should be some hashtags, all the appropriate hashtags posted on some slides on Zoom as well. And we want to make sure that this session, these dialogues, are broadcast broadly and widely to make sure that we have impact, because I think you will probably agree with me that impact is what we need right now. I think between the climate crisis and increasing air pollution concerns, as well, of course, now with the COVID pandemic, I think we've all become very acutely aware of the need for joined up thinking and for all of us to work together, not only to address the direct problems that we know are associated with our mobility needs, but even more broadly thinking, I think we need some joined up thinking, working together so that we can not only promote health much more broadly, but also redress health inequalities in the way that we design future transportation solutions.
Why are you staying?
Sorry, I may be interrupted a few times with children. So, I hope, no, okay, so I hope you'll engage in teasing out all these future transportation issues, policies and solutions. And to start us off, I'll give the floor to Nigel Topping. He's the high-level champion for climate action for COP26. Nigel. Okay, I'll try the way you talk. The floor is yours, Nigel.
Thank you, Audrey. I think you just saved by the bell. Yes, not lovely to see that next generation so eager to get into on the action. You know, when this is really timely conversation about mobility and health. You know, when Gonzalo and I launched the Race to Zero in June, we were joined by Dr. Maria Neira from the World Health Organization, and she reminded us that this is not just a race to zero emissions, it needs to be a race to zero premature deaths. I think she reminded us that every year 7 million people die prematurely because of pulmonary issues as a result of air pollution, many of them caused by the same things that cause climate change, like burning coal and running cars. So it seems like this issue of mobility is really at the heart of this nexus of climate and health. When we talk about the race to zero dialogues, we're really talking about what are the practical pathways to get to zero in each sector. And this one is a great example of what we call systems transformation, where everything is interconnected, you know, and often things seem simple when you don't have to deliver them. So I can simply say all we have to do is end the sale and use of combustion engines. And I hope we'll hear some more about how that's going and what some of the challenges are. All we have to do is drive towards more active transport, more walking and cycling, the 15-minute city that we've been hearing about from some of the mayors. And all we've got to do is provide great public transport. So of course, each one of those three is really complex on their own. And if you're working in a city, or if you're in the value chain of any one of those, you've got to deliver all three together in an interconnected way. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of the great speakers about the progress that is being made, the challenges that we face, and the practical steps that need to be taken in the next 5 years in the reign of current mayors to make sure that we are on track by 2025 to get to fully decarbonised transport systems as soon as possible, so that we can ensure that the next generation who are so keen to get in on the act can go to cities, can live in cities and breathe healthy air, and have the empowering abilities to travel around the cities that cities right now and cities of the citizens of the future deserve and are demanding. So with that, Audrey, I'll hand back to you. I'm looking forward to being in listening mode and to wrapping up again at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nigel, for setting us off and drawing our attention to this big need for systemic transformation, which I'm really looking forward to discussing with all of our speakers. But first, for now, we're going to bring in to the table, or to the screen rather, a speaker who is deeply and really acutely aware of the destruction that air pollution can cause in people's lives. And of course, air pollution being a major link to transport. Rosamund Kissi-Debrah is a tireless campaigner for air quality, and I'm sure you'll have come across her if that's your area of work, as she has bottomless energy and is so engaged. So Rosamund is the founder of the Roberta Family Foundation. She set this foundation up after the death of her daughter in 2013 from a severe form of asthma. And she's been fighting in the courts ever since to get air pollution to be stated as a cause of death on her daughter's death certificate. So Rosamund, of course, you've sadly experienced firsthand how devastating air pollution can be on our health. So from your own observations, what would you say is, what do you see as the role of transport policies to promote health?
I think the decision makers need to probably bring to mind is how dirty diesel. So I think one of the first things I would say now is how to quickly get rid of diesel, because it's so devastating. And I think whenever I speak, I try and get people to visualize exactly what happens, the connection between transport and health, because we can sit here and talk about it, but maybe a lot of people don't experience it. And Nigel mentioned about the premature deaths. Because we don't actually see them, that is my concern. We talk in a sort of abstract way. And what I try and do all the time is for people to be able to visualize that you could have a gridlock, and that in turn, there's lots of air pollution and children could be walking past. And depending on how susceptible they are to it, that alone could set off an asthma attack. So you have to visualize it. And I think maybe we talk about air pollution, we talk about people dying, but we don't see it. And I think that's one of the things people don't bear in mind. They can't quite connect. But if you look at how air pollution can get into the body and the damage it can do, that's what, transport, that's why people need to have transport in mind. That's what I have come to the conclusion. We talk about air pollution all the time and we talk about premature deaths all the time, and yet we haven't yet got there yet. I've got to be very honest. We haven't got there yet. And I think there's an education to be had. I think to inform the public at large, therefore, to make their understanding better. So, we come on here, we talk about it, we go away, but the public isn't quite engaged yet. There is a lot of education to be done. And I believe that doctors and other people need to make people really aware of this, because I think the common person struggles. Because when you think about it, it's the pollution in cars is more than maybe walking on the streets. And yet parents put their children in cars all the time. They don't put them in there on purpose to make them unhealthy. But lots of people, when I have said, did you know the air pollution in your car is worse? People look at me and say, how? How is that possible? So I think education is really key. But I think diesel needs to be scrapped as soon as possible. There is now no denying the impact, especially, and we need to bring things forward a lot more quicker. I think young people continue to be ill, and because we don't see them, I don't think there is an urgency enough. That's how I basically feel about it. I got a bit of a reminder this summer with I think my children in general, they must be susceptible. They must be those type of children who are. And when the air pollution was high, so something that I thought I'd put, way behind me, it came back again. And for me, it was a bit of a shock. Unless we do something, asthma is going to continue, and we can't have a society where lots of children are medicated up on asthma pumps and things like that. We keep on talking about it. There needs to be more action, and it needs to be quicker. Children still die of asthma, so that's what we need to think about.
So would you say that with the COVID pandemic and the lockdown, that there's been more of an awareness? You say that there's a real need of more awareness of the impacts of transport on air pollution, the impact of air pollution on health. Would you say that there's a bit more of an acute awareness of this with COVID? And if that's the case, what is it that you believe that in the recovery from COVID that the policymakers should really be most focusing on right now?
People now know what clean air is. It happened all over the world during lockdown, so that we are not in doubt about. And I think how we get there, because the economy needs to run, and this is the tricky bit. We're in lockdown in England right now, and I don't think we're going to get back to the stage we were before. There was literally at one point, public transport was down by 90%. Now, you can't do that if you want to run an economy. People need to go to work. But I do think they need to think more carefully about how they build back. And they need to make sure they do not make the pollution worse than it was. Because of COVID, I have admitted to people, it is very tricky, because I used to sing about public transport all the time. And people are incredibly nervous because we have a virus that transmits, through humans. So going on public transport now is incredibly tricky. Maybe they need to come up with schemes. I think maybe governments and local authorities need to come up with schemes to encourage people. We need to do something about it. We all can't jump back into our cars. No. So, but they need to think very, very carefully what works and what doesn't. And my plea to them now would be, if they design a scheme and maybe it doesn't work, then we need to go back to the drawing board. Yes, I will say it again, and I'm sure people have heard it all the time, that short journeys where people can, we need to walk more and we need to cycle more. I mean, this is things that people have heard again, and I think maybe some people might be switched off, but for short journeys, this is true. I don't have the answers to lots of long journeys right now. I actually don't have the answers to but that's why the decision makers, that's what they are paid for, to sort of come up. But I think they need to come up with more schemes to encourage people. We need to continue to educate, and we need to encourage people. And where people can walk and things like that, we need to encourage them. Positive, we might need to reinforce it, especially young people. We might have to give them incentives. And why they are doing it, it is for their health.
Yes, and I think you live in London, and in London we know that 2/3 of the car trips are less than 5 kilometers. So as you say, there are quite a few of those short trips that we can hopefully be converting to walking and cycling. So let's see what our politicians have to say about that. Thank you so much for raising those really important issues. And we'll turn now to our mayors who are going to be engaged in a discussion for the next few minutes. And first, I have to say that I'm really sorry, but the mayor of Freetown, Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, is sick, sadly, and she just won't be able to join us today. And of course, we hope that she'll have a fast recovery and continue to engage in the brilliant way in which she engages on matters of transport and health. But luckily enough, we still have with us today Shirley Rodrigues, who's the Deputy Mayor of Environment and Energy in London, and also Charlotte Marchandise, who's the former Deputy Mayor of Rennes in France, and the President of the WHO Healthy Cities Network in France. So we'll start out with Shirley Rodrigues, keeping with the London focus right now. So Shirley, we know how much COVID, of course, as we just talked about, has been a huge issue in London. A lot of people have been affected and have hugely suffered. But despite all of those horrific problems with COVID-19, during that first lockdown that we had back in March, so many Londoners expressed how much they enjoyed the blue skies, the clean air, hearing the birds sing, riding their bikes freely, even be able to ride their bikes with their children because they weren't as afraid of traffic anymore. So many positive things came out of this first lockdown. So can you tell us what you see as a way forward to make sure that we retain this path that we were on for a healthier city after COVID and the building back after COVID? Shirley.
Thank you, Audrey. And yeah, absolutely. We weren't the only ones, in London to have that experience. And many Londoners have expressed to us in writing into Sadiq, the Mayor of London, or in our polling, that they really enjoyed, as you say, the blue skies, the cleaner air, hearing the noise of nature, not the sound of traffic, and being able to get out and about in their communities when they were able to get out of lockdown. However, our challenge is we are seeing car levels returning to pre-pandemic levels very fast. And, for some of the reasons that Rosamund talked about, fear of public transport, a lot of people are working, more closely at home. So, they're using their cars for those short journeys, which we know can be walked or cycled. But the mayor has been very clear that, we cannot have a car-based recovery. We are intent, as many other cities are, as nations are, on how do we prepare for coming out of the pandemic and recover in a way that builds back better, that is a green and fair recovery. And key to that is making sure that our transport system is resilient, but is fair, accessible to all. But given today's topic, is decarbonised and doesn't contribute to air pollution. And the number of vehicle movements, we have a very high level of fossil fuel vehicles. So critical to for the mayor is to make sure that these are reduced, eliminated, and really calling on government to phase out the sale of new fossil fuel vehicles by 2030. The mayor has called for that. But what are we doing in London? So we're doing a number of things around mode shift, encouraging people to use public transport, discouraging the use of dirty vehicles. So it's a key initiative, and you'll have heard of this, is the ultra low emission zone, which was introduced last year. And it targets with very high standards, making sure that if you have to drive into the centre of London, then you will pay for using a non-compliant vehicle. And that has had an amazing improvement, a dramatic reduction in pollution in the order of 44%. So that is very, very high. We've seen a reduction in CO2 emissions. We've seen a reduction in the number of polluting vehicles, non-compliant vehicles driving in the centre at all, 44,000 less. So these are areas, that's just one policy alongside some of the work we've been doing on promoting active transportation, so more walking and cycling. We had already tripled the amount of protected road space for cycles, but because of COVID and the need to enable safe physical distancing, we've reclaimed some road space through some temporary measures to allow people to cycle more safely and walk more safely, and also instituting what we call school streets. So as kids go back to school, the routes to school or the streets outside their schools are no longer filled with traffic, so they're able to scoot and walk and cycle safely. We're cleaning up our buses and making sure that the cleanest buses are on the most polluted areas, and these are already having big effects. We've seen a 97% reduction in the number of schools in polluted areas. We've seen huge numbers of drops in hospital admissions, which then obviously brings relief to the NHS, and not least in cost to the NHS. We know it brings economic benefits as well. A recent WHO and our business organisation CBI found that it reduces the number of working days lost to illnesses, 3 million across the UK, in the order of 1.6 billion of annual economic benefit. But most of all, it helps reduce inequalities. We know that people are disproportionately affected by air pollution, and for NO2, the combination of policies that the Mayor is bringing in will reduce the difference between the most deprived areas and the least deprived areas by something in the order of 70%. So these are very significant policies, if taken together, will help tackle air pollution, our toxic air, and tackle the climate emergency. And just to conclude, I don't know if people saw the report today that in the UK, the RAC Foundation released a report that showed that the impacts of COVID and the fear of public transport and so on has set back attitudes in the UK to using public transport by 2 decades. That's 20 years of work that we've all been involved in to promote that use of mass transit. And this isn't restricted to London. We know lots of other cities are experiencing that. So this is absolutely critical that we together, as Rosamund says, come up with those solutions that really drive, encourage people back to using public transport. And those policies that I've set out are the ones that I think will do that.
So you've talked a lot about the policies to engage people in shifting their currently polluting cars to less polluting cars, and an effort with temporary measures to promote walking and cycling. Can you say something about how more permanent those measures are going to be, rather than just temporary measures? And then in terms of the public transport, what do you think is going to be the way to re-engage people with public transport? As you set out, it's quite a challenge to get people to feel less, but that will be the most equitable approach, of course, is to get people to re-engage with public transport. What's the plan for that?
So in terms of a permanent measure, the ultra low emission zone that was brought into central London is going to be expanded next year, next October, to a size that is 18 times larger than the current size. So if you know London, it goes out to the north and south circular. So, inner London, essentially, affecting many more, a bigger area. So that's a very major commitment that the Mayor has made and has recommitted to, because of, we don't want to replace a sort of public health crisis caused by COVID with a public crisis, health crisis caused by air pollution. And we know what the solutions are, those sort of combination of public transportation and incentives and disincentives as well. In terms of some of the measures that we've been bringing in on cycling, this was a big program that we were already rolling out. The very specific temporary measures that we brought in as a response to the pandemic and allowing safe social distancing. These are temporary measures, but they're really a policy tool that has been long-standing, these low traffic neighbourhoods. So we will carry on rolling out the larger programme, but the ones that were brought in as an emergency measures will be consulted on. Some of them have gone in very fast and may not be quite right, may need to be tweaked. That's the usual order of things that we do with transportation measures. It's no different to what we've been doing for the last God knows how many years. Some will come out, but then they're no longer needed, and some new ones will go in. The school streets are very popular. 300 have gone in. There's huge demand for them because people realise that the kids like them, parents like them, school teachers like them. And in terms of how do we work on encouraging people back to public transport? Well, it's partly what we've been doing in London, which is stressing how, the safety of it. We have a massive cleaning regime. We've got research going on to show that the contacts, the sort of diffusion of COVID isn't there. We've got some research that's underway in that area. The policies that we had before, which was about making sure that we keep our fares low, obviously slightly difficult at the moment because we're having a discussion, if I can put it politely, with our UK government about the level of funding of our network system. And I think that there's absolutely something there about we need a sustainable financing model for public transportation. In London, it's very, we rely on fare income, essentially, and a little bit of public sort of local taxation. We get no government grant, unlike New York or Tokyo or Paris, which is, just not tenable. So that funding mechanism is absolutely critical.
Thank you so much. So this is a good segue to talk about another city around the world. We're now going to bring in Charlotte Marchandise, who was the former mayor, deputy mayor in charge of health in Rennes, a city in France, and also has worked closely with the WHO, leading the WHO cities network in France. So Charlotte, from that perspective, and having also heard what Shirley had to say about the London experience, can you tell us a bit about what your own vision is of a healthy city?
Thank you very much. And well, my own vision doesn't make sense. Our vision, our shared vision within healthy cities in all the world, because WHO Healthy Cities is a global network. And I've been also leading the political vision group at European level. So working with 1,500 deputy mayors committed to health in their cities, something amazing. And when we talk about healthy cities, we talk about health of the population, but health being integrated in all the policies, taking decision in an ideal world, but aiming at taking decision that any policies that we make in the city will take into account the impact on the health and on the climate together to improve the health of the population and reduce inequities. And this is at the core of the Healthy City Network. It's about planet, but it's about people, it's about participation. And we also claim a lot that health is a political choice. And we know it's a good political choice at global level, at national level, but local level has levers, an opportunity with transportation policies, but lots of all policies to reach out for communities, to act with the people, to test, to learn, to adapt, and to help others to scale up. Thank you so much for inviting a mother to begin with, because we know if we want people to change behavior, saying you have to change behavior is not enough. Actually, it doesn't work. We need incentives. But I mean, if we create our own incentives, it will not work. I mean, don't eat sugar, don't drink alcohol. Does it work? No. And don't take your car doesn't work either. What we need to ask, and this is what Healthy City does, is what you need to do to take a bike. Well, you need proper cycle lane, and coronavirus, and the deputy mayor from London said is a great opportunity for that. We need a bicycle. Some people cannot buy a bicycle. You need to learn how to ride a bicycle. And the school, the cycling school that we made in many cities are something that is changing, that it's game changing. And we need to make political choices that encourage good behavior. We need to make political choices that will make a city where it's the good choice to make the good choice for your health, because it's good for you, because it's the best solution. But it's complex. It takes data. It takes research, but it's always very hard to work with researchers because as policymakers, we don't have time to read all the theses. We don't have sometimes the understanding. I've been working with University College of London in a big international project on complex urban system for sustainability and health. And the hardest part is making cities understand what the researcher is doing. So we need this cortege, this moment of this mediation. And we need also advocacy, political leadership, and participation. And COVID crisis has shown that political leadership can be a game changer or not. We need to understand the theory. but we need to see how the theory is actually happening in real life. So for instance, we know that the kids from the most deprived family have got more overweight problem of the other kids. It's not because they don't know what to eat. It's because it's very, very complex determinants, because it takes lots of things. And air pollution is one of the determinants, together with lots of things. So having a healthy city is not saying, oh, the kids from those neighborhoods, they should walk more. No, it's how come they don't walk? How come they're exposed to so many things? How come they don't have access to fresh products and they've got fast food all over the way? And to do that, we need to put health in our policy, and we need to frame health not as something on top of it that you need to think about. Oh, come on, you health people, you're not funny. Another thing we've got to take into account. We need to frame health as a win-win strategy, as something everybody owns, and everybody is proud of it, and that it fits everybody's needs. And we need economics, and the deputy mayor from London said about economics, but we need also that we are proud together of what we are doing for our city. We need to be proud together of with businesses, with NGOs, with disabled people, because some people are not going to take a bicycle. What do we do? How can we make that better? As a matter of fact, complexity required complex solutions, and it requires time. And that's what is great about government. We have some time. We can think of the future. We can think of the next generation. And I think this is really the role of new political leaders. And we see them, they're championing. And they're not talking about them. They're not talking about their re-election. They're talking about what are we going to leave for our children? They're talking about, how can I help you to have a healthy city? How can I give you tools to measure air pollution? That's what we did in Rennes. We gave citizens sensors so that they can measure the pollution, so that they can understand the complexity of pollution. And then we gave them money through participatory budget to give it better. Last but not least, something that is game-changing is healthy urban planning, is training health experts in all the sectors, all the people that are actually planning a city, making the buildings, making the habitat, making the streets, making the places where the kids are playing, because sometimes the places where the kids are playing are not good for health. And because they cannot move, because they've got games that are not funny, because they don't have the good trees, because they're nearby big streets. So giving the health expertise to the people actually building the city is something that is going to be game-changing.
It's very inspiring. Thank you so much. I love your vision, very much of a systems thinking of putting it all together. But let's say you're in a city where your local elected official has no interest in making this happen. What's the first thing you do for that politician to engage? Because as you say, to engage citizens, you also need to create the infrastructure that makes it possible. So the street closures in London, people are loving, for example, but you first need to make that happen. And you've described many wonderful things. How do you make that? How do you create that engagement to start out with?
Well, you first need to find the political windows of opportunity. So first is reading, and I've been working a lot with NGOs, helping them to find their frame, their window, finding where in the program of the elected mayor, if elected, or what in the program can be an entry point. And if you don't enter by the door, okay, come back by the window. You have many, many public policies where you can actually act on health. We cannot do everything. In my mandate, I had amazing things going on. With some colleagues, it simply didn't work. They didn't want to hear about me. Okay, well, we did what we could. We also, things that are working very well is local competition. Like, the near city, all cities have someone to compete a little bit with. Oh, they're doing that. Oh, we want to do that too. Of course, public opinion. Of course, medias. The more you have article on the media, the more suddenly, oh my God, this is interesting. And personal experience of the mayors can be sometime a way to catch their attention. But you need to frame it in a way that you can put a foot in the door. And once you put a feet, when you're beginning to change, it's the step-by-step action. But I think more than anything, if you have the convening power of a mayor, if you have the convening power of a deputy mayor, even if the other people don't want to hear about health in your municipality, in your government, you have the people go into the neighborhood, raise the people together, talk about them, talk with the mother who have this asthma experience, talk with them, raise them, empower them, and then act together.
Many thanks. I hope lots of people are listening and ready to go and knock on their politicians' doors and make it happen now. Thank you so much. So now we'll move on to Heather Thompson. Heather is the CEO of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP. And then we'll also talk to Mark Watts, who is the Executive Director of C40 Cities Network. But first, Heather, can you tell us a bit what your reaction has been so far to everything that's been said, in particular in the light of the ITDP's research and then some of the key lessons that have been learned from your recent summits on sustainable transport, from your annual Sustainable Transport Summit, Mobilize. So given the research that you do within ITDP, can you contrast that a bit with what you've been hearing today and give us your reaction? All yours, Heather.
Sure, thank you. Well, just to begin, just a little bit on ITDP. We're a nonprofit organization that's been around for about 35 years, and we have offices all over the world. We're located in New York, which is where I am, but most of our offices are located in the developing world, and we support mayors and others in cities that are trying to make their cities healthier with more sustainable transportation. So lots of experience to rest on. And I guess maybe just to bring some research to bear, some of our own and some from others on some of the comments that have been made so far. I mean, first, I think COVID-19 really has just been bringing transparency to the reality that we live in and really exposing the significance of air quality and the damage to health. Many of you may have seen the Harvard study that came out earlier this year that showed that COVID was up to 15 times more lethal for people that were exposed to bad air quality. And this was supported by a study that just came out last week that again showed that COVID is about 11 times more deadly on average across the world, with some cities showing 27 times more lethal. COVID is more lethal when you're exposed to air quality. Cities in China rated 27 times higher. And we know also that it's the poor people that are suffering the most, as they're the ones that are most often exposed to the air quality because they're often forced to live next to congested, polluted highways. And children are really bearing the brunt of it. Rosamund gave a horrific example from her own family, but this is happening around the world. We've been doing a lot of work with the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, trying to educate people on the impact air quality has, and just the air quality, noise pollution, so much stress to children at young ages. When children are just born in their infancy, they breathe 4 times more per minute than an adult does. And toddlers breathe 2 times more times per minute. So their lungs are being developed. And when that air quality damages their lungs in those early years, that stays with them the rest of their lives. And this damage, this destruction from air quality is super emblematic at the time of COVID. But really, it's just bringing transparency to what we know is happening with climate change. Fires and floods, of course, are getting worse, and that's becoming clearer for sure, but so much of the damage we can't even see. Transportation contributes to about 25% of all energy-related emissions, and it's the fastest source of emissions around the world. The good news is we do have solutions, and they've been referred to already today. We know how to design cities to be healthy for people and planet. We need to design cities for people and not for cars. We need more public transportation, walking, and cycling. And we referred earlier to electrification, and electrifying vehicles can really help. But our studies at ITDP have shown that this is not enough. We need fewer cars on the road if we actually want to meet our 1.5 degree or 2 degree scenarios, which we all know is our global target for climate change. And we know that we need to make solutions accessible to everybody, which again points to public transportation and walking and cycling. The other point of good news is that solutions are not difficult or expensive. We've already had some examples, and what it really takes is political will. And we're seeing cities around the world move in the right direction. We already heard a little bit from London and Rennes. Also, we've made reference to Paris making their huge commitment to promoting the 15-minute city concept. And we often hear examples from Europe, but we're seeing really incredible moves across the world. Jakarta, Indonesia, for example, in Southeast Asia is investing in hundreds of kilometers of new walking and cycling infrastructure along huge public transport investments for the last decade. Jakarta is the proud winner of the next International Sustainable Transport Award, which we just announced at ITDP's Mobilize Summit last week. Addis Ababa in Ethiopia in East Africa is focused on development that puts public transport, walking, and cycling at the center of their development as well. Rio de Janeiro and cities around Brazil are doing the same. Mexico City is investing in a new bus rapid transit corridor and protected bike lanes. And India, in reaction to COVID, has created several national challenges with more than 100 cities participating to focus on rolling out cycling and walking and public transportation investments. And some of these same cities are integrating all of these approaches to create zero emission areas. Shirley had referred to the ultra low emission zone in London, and cities around the world are trying to do similar things, creating zero emission areas, which predominantly focus on walking and cycling to make a statement in their commitment to address climate change. So these are just a few examples, and there are many more cities taking the lead, and the trend is growing. We just need more cities leaders to get on board, and this is the future that we want. This is the future that we know that we need. We have the solutions to make cities healthier places for the people on the planet. It's simple. We just need investment in clean public transportation and walking and cycling, and I'm happy to get into the details of how to make that happen.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Maybe we'll move on to Mark now, and then we'll come back to some more specifics on how to make it happen. So Mark Watts, can you tell us a little bit about the C40 Global Mayor's COVID-19 recovery task, particularly the health and the green and just recovery agenda of C40, and tell us how it resonates with what we've been talking about so far.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a really brilliant discussion, and I think for me, what comes out so strongly from what everybody said is that it's just so clear how health, climate, social justice are completely inextricably linked, and that's becoming more and more obvious to everybody as a result, unfortunately, of the terrible COVID crisis. If you want to tackle inequality, if you want to improve health, if you want to protect our future, give us the future we want, as Heather just said, then you've got to start by cutting pollution. We've been doing in C40 and this year is inevitably really being focused on COVID because we're an organisation of mayors of big cities that have been very much the centre of the epidemic around the world. And our message has been that resolving the COVID pandemic and finally getting on track to stop climate breakdown have got to be done together now. It's so clear that longer term environmental destruction is destroying our health, whether that's air pollution or creating the conditions for the spread of viruses like COVID-19, or increasing the severity of their impacts, which is unfortunately true for many people who've been hardest hit by the COVID virus. But most immediately, and the message of the C40 Green and Just Recovery Task Force that you referred to, Audrey, the message of that is that the biggest immediate test of any government's climate policy is what kind of COVID recovery it's trying to deliver. And for those governments that can afford a stimulus, where that stimulus funding is going. What our research shows, it's called the case for a green and just recovery, is that if we have a big and a fast enough stimulus package, we can get a green recovery. And in fact, we can feasibly see a path to cutting emissions in half by 2030 as the science demands to get on track to stay under 1.5 degrees of global heating. In truth, that goal seemed out of reach until this year. It's the fact that everything's been thrown up in the air by this terrible pandemic. And therefore you can now see that it's possible to have massive public investment to change the way that societies function, to massively, at the moment, to save lives from COVID, but equally possible to do that to save lives in the future from climate change now. The downside of our analysis is, though, that at the moment, only 3 to 5% of stimulus around the world is in any way green. And it sort of is almost worse than carrying on with business as usual. What's happening at the moment is we're using public money, taxpayers' money, to prop up industries that should be going into decline as we invest in the new, cleaner industries and services of the future. And instead, we're propping them up. So actually, we risk coming out of COVID with a worse trajectory than we were on before. But to focus on the positive message of our analysis, just looking across the C40 cities, is if we get a really big, quick, a sort of 5-year massive investment program, we'll get people back to work, 50 million new jobs across 100 C40 cities alone, a third more than going back to business as usual, at least 270,000 lives saved from reducing air pollution alone. And the economic benefits are vast, $280 billion just across C40 cities economy, just from the health benefits, purely from the stimulus to the economy from saving and improving people's lives. And I'll finish here, but the transport sector is really key in that. It's over a quarter of emissions across the major cities in the world. It's also where we see, after the building sector, the second biggest opportunity for job creation through a green recovery. And I think, as we've really heard from all of the other speakers, is that we're starting to see, in the midst of this pandemic, this tragedy, this health tragedy, we're starting to see some glimpses of the possibilities also of a more sustainable future, particularly around mobility. I loved Shirley's phrase, we've been hearing the sound of nature, not the noise of traffic in our cities. And that actually, to Rosamund's point, I think that's been helping to make air pollution, carbon pollution less abstract. You still can't see it, but being able to notice the difference between what it was like living in a polluted city and then that brief moment of respite during lockdowns from air pollution and feeling something different creates the sense of a possibility of something different as we try and come out of this pandemic.
So I think both of you have talked about how the importance of making, and others before you, about the importance of making visible both climate change and air pollution. And you both have talked about a vision of all the things that need to happen. So we're now are seeing things being more visible. We know what to do. We know what are the solutions. Concretely, how do we make it happen? Can you both tell us some very specifics? So what are the next steps? How to implement? How do you make sure that you have that stimulus package that goes in the right direction? How do you make sure that we have those visions? So do you want to start, Heather, and then Mark again?
Sure. Well, I think part of it is, we do need advocacy organizations. We need people in every city to rise up and really demand that their cities, that their states, nations make the right choices. And again, I think COVID has really, brought a lot of what is happening to bear, but we do need people to continue to rise up and ask for a better situation. So I applaud Rosamund, and we need many more Rosamunds in the world. But I think governments often first say, they don't have enough money to do the things that are necessary. So revenue is certainly a stress, especially when it comes to public transportation. And so there are cities all around the world asking, how are we going to afford this? Some nations are lucky enough to have recovery packages that are being put into place. As Mark points out, we really need to make sure that that money is going into the right places. But I think there are more kind of win-win opportunities to bring money into the system, but also to help create the right incentives. So the ultra low emission zone was one example that was created before, but there are many opportunities where we can create more disincentives for driving that also are revenue generating opportunities. So parking is one opportunity that is huge around cities. So much space goes to parking, often free parking in the world. And if we were to limit parking or charge for parking, it's a great opportunity for revenue. And if that revenue is redirected to help subsidize public transportation or create more public spaces, more infrastructure for walking and cycling, it's a win-win for everybody. We take the space away for cars, we make it less attractive for driving, we put more space into public space, walking and cycling, and we have revenue that can go directly into sustainable transportation. And very few cities have actually done this around the world where we've seen it happen. It's working. London is a great example of that. And it doesn't take a massive scale. Parking is also attractive because you can do it on a block by block measure. You don't have to create a city-wide policy, which often is politically difficult. You can do it on a block by block measure, neighborhood by neighborhood, and build it up to something that is really full scale. In the case of Mexico City, for example, they passed a building code that changed the requirements in buildings to lower the number of parking spaces that were required. And we did this hand in hand in Mexico City with the real estate development community that wanted to have more space for commercial and retail space rather than for empty parking spots. And so that was a win-win for the real estate. It was a win-win for sustainable transportation, and it created more space for affordable housing, which we know is a limitation in almost every city around the world. Despite the changes in, commuting and real estate that we see happening because of COVID, we still know that space for affordable housing is limited. So if you take that space away from cars and buildings, you have more space for affordable housing. So again, a simple measure that I think a lot more cities should be paying attention to.
Thank you for those very concrete ideas. Mark, how about you? What do you think? How do we make sure that that stimulus package goes in the right direction?
Well, yeah, I very much agree with what Heather said there. And I think in particular, alongside the parking charges, you do need to be making the polluter pay and give the right incentives and disincentives for the form of mobility that you choose. People get into their car because it's effectively subsidized in most countries in the world in the fact that the oil and gas is cheap, and it needs to be the price needs to reflect the true costs. But I think the bigger picture most immediately here is there's no way we're going to have a green and a just recovery. There's no way we're going to shift to cleaner forms of mobility without massive public investment in the most immediate period. Because the economy is in such dire straits, and because societies have been so affected by COVID. And so that does mean the advocacy effort to change the current direction of those stimulus packages is absolutely critical, but also that the positive example of what the opportunity is so clear. That's what we've been trying to do at C40 with the COVID mayoral task force, is to show that there'll be more jobs created with a green and a just recovery package. There'll be better health outcomes as well as better environmental outcomes. It's a complete win-win. So we've got to keep making and winning that case. And then what mayors all around the world are doing at the moment, which is pushing ahead to support their citizens in providing better mobility in the context of COVID, that also illustrates the kind of future that we want. So all the mayors, the mayor of Sydney was saying the other day, they've delivered more kilometres of cycle lanes in the last 5 months than normally they'd be able to do in 5 years. And the public is completely supportive and with them. And they're pushing ahead now with big programs to encourage groups that weren't cycling so much to join in, particularly women in Sydney, and again getting masses of support behind it. So it's a moment to push ahead that 15-minute city concept that's getting picked up so much amongst professionals at the moment, but starting to become popularized, because actually you're not penalizing people, you're selling people something that they want. The ability to access all the services, the job, that within a 15-minute walk or cycle of where they live, and that requires really good, careful, thoughtful planning and preparation by public authorities, and the support of an international advocacy and expert groups like Heather's to help design how that's and share those best practice across the world.
Thank you. That gives us some inspiring thoughts. And I will move on now to stay on, everybody, because I will move on to looking for some questions from the audience. Now's your time to shine. So let me see, questions from the audience, from Francis McGuire. Has the data showing reductions in hospital admissions following air pollution reduction in London been published? If so, what was revealed? I think, Shirley, you're the one who mentioned this particular data. Would you like to answer that?
Yeah, we've published a lot of data on air pollution, you know, on inequalities, on health. I think the last one I remember seeing that we published was last year, just before the ultra low emission zone was implemented. And I think we were looking at research that showed about 1,000 Londoners per year were being admitted to hospital, many of those children. But have a look on the website. I'll post something in the Q&A where people can either look at our media centre, sort by environment, and look at the information on air pollution, or the air quality page, and lists all the research that we've published, working with big, you know, major institutions, academic institutions in London and around the world.
And following up on that, do you know how much the taxis contribute to this pollution, particularly in London?
It's high because they are, you know, heavy diesel vehicles, essentially doing a lot of mileage in central London. My recollection is that there are about 16 to 17,000 black cabs. This is not the mini cabs, but we're talking about the heavy black cabs. We have a policy that the mayor introduced in 2018 that no more new diesel taxis would be licensed, so they all have to be zero emission capable. And since that policy, we're now seeing in the order of I think now over 3,500 zero emission capable taxis, but that's still a sort of proportion of the fleet. So about 25%, I guess, have shifted. We also have a policy that encourages, so each taxi is licensed for a certain amount of time. It was 15 years. As of November, that's been reduced to 14 years, and then it rolls on with a reduction. So I think it's by 2022, but you'll only be licensed for 12 years. So we're slowly shifting. You know, they're quite expensive to invest in, so you've got to give people time. But we've also introduced a sort of series of penalties and incentives, essentially, to encourage that fleet to be cleaner.
I wonder if others can comment on taxis and Ubers and such in other cities, because of course now that everybody's afraid of taking public transportation, and we know how much, well, of course the case of London is quite severe because the original vehicle fleet is very diesel heavy, which isn't necessarily the case in other cities. But can others comment on other cities and how much whether there is something to do particularly around taxis in other city contexts? I don't know who wants to take this on. Maybe, yeah, go ahead.
Not so much on the taxis, because we know also how it goes and how it can feel like it's not fair. And we also know that some people, the wealthiest, they prefer to pay tax and not change behavior. And that's true in many ways. But systematic approach is also always very interesting. And as a city, you have a procurement policy. So you do call for tenders. And this is moments that you can change lots of things. And you talk about it when it's on public transportation, but it's also on the way, if you're giving food to the schools of your city, who is going to provide the food of the schools, of the elder homes? How can you just change everything where you have power? Someone mentioned the Q&A about who is providing you with the energy. Is that sustainable energy, electricity? How do you do that? So, I mean, we can put taxis, and at national level, I think it's really interesting. You've got also to work win-win strategy, but focusing, and we did a whole ecosystemic work on the food, but it was also through the water, through the air pollution, through the health of the kids, through the economy of the agriculture. And it's a whole ecosystem. It takes time, but within 4 years, we radically changed the way most of 80% of the food, while almost local and produced locally and produced by respecting the environment. So economic incentive can be also in a systematic approach.
And the impetus for putting it all together is how did you make that systems thinking approach? Did you just decide to go ahead and model it to demonstrate how everything was connected? And once you had that data, you were able to convince your policymakers, or
it was again a window of opportunity. The procurement responsible wanted to go for organic in the schools, for the food in the schools. Another elected said, well, I cannot prove that organic food is better for the health of the kid. But local food, yes, it's good because it reduces air pollution. And then we stopped having a company, Veolia, for the water, and it became a public good. So we could say we are protecting the water by pushing to have local agriculture that are actually doing organic or sustainable agriculture. And we say, well, because you're doing that, we're going to create, I don't know how to say that, sorry, filière, that we are going to buy your product for the schools. And within 4 years, of course, the first year, one of them doing bread, he could produce for half of the schools. But within 4 years, we could have 100% of the school eating bread from a local producer who engaged himself in transporting and in protecting the water. So it was step by step, but always keeping the vision. So I say Oscar Wilde, have a dream big enough not to lose sight.
Yeah, so demonstrating through the systems thinking. And I think, Mark, you also mentioned how the positive examples were so important. Once you've lived the experience, then of course you can engage people in it much more easily. And I think when it comes to transport solutions that have that positive element, it's easier to engage people. But how do you first make it happen so that you can? So Mark, you mentioned the need for positive examples and how they worked, then people loved it. But how do you convince the policymakers that they, or Heather, you also mentioned parking pricing works. But how do you make it happen so that you first go for it? Once it's implemented, then you can live it, you can see the impacts. How do you get that first trigger?
Well, I think that's part of the reason organisations like C40 exist, because one of the iron rules I've learned in politics is actually most leaders don't want to be the first to do anything. They'd like to be the second after they've seen it work somewhere else and can safely kind of copy it and do it in their own way that suits their own city or country. And that's very sensible. But you do need trailblazers. You do need the innovators that are willing to take risks and to try things. What we try and do in C40 then is just to make sure that best practice gets shared very quickly. And so that the uptake is very rapid. And I think you've seen that a lot over recent years. In bus rapid transit, which ITDP really did a lot to push, it kind of exploded around the world. We haven't talked much about kind of vehicle electrification for good reason here, I think, but the speed with which it went from 4 or 5 electric buses in some of the biggest cities in the world to whole fleets of electric buses, essentially because one country, China, really invested and showed that you could have thousands of electric buses running in a major city. And that's really happened very quickly. So I think that's where you've got to take the good examples where they exist and share them quickly.
So going back on this electricity, I kind of want to challenge you on all of you on it's something that, of course, most people, when we start talking about transportation solutions, the first thing that comes to mind is we need to change the technology of cars, make them low emission, make them electric. And of course, that has some kind of effect on air pollution, and it certainly has an effect on air pollution, but it's only changing one car for another car. And it doesn't have all the multiple other benefits that many of you have been talking about. And it's also a potential for lock-in. Once you've invested in that infrastructure, getting out of that infrastructure if you realize that actually you've just changed one car for another car. So how is there not a risk? So Shirley, for example, I know there's been a huge amount of investment in London towards electrification of the vehicle fleet, towards low emission vehicles. Do you have any fear of that lock-in to that one technology, which will be difficult to get out of if in the end you go for more the 15-minute city as in Paris, or the super block city as in Barcelona, which are much more geared towards people and walking and cycling? So perhaps if Shirley, you can comment on that, and maybe Heather as well. I can bring in that conversation. Shirley, go ahead.
Yeah, I would be worried, but as Heather's pointed out, and many others today, it needs that strategic and systemic view taken. So in London, the Mayor has published a Mayor's transport strategy and a Mayor's environmental strategy that link together. And the first target in that is to move most of the vehicle trips to walking and cycling. An 80% target is what he's set. So it's absolutely clear it's not replacing dirty fossil fuel vehicles with cleaner hybrids or actually zero emission vehicles. It's about getting people out of their cars. And what he's also set is a very specific target around increasing the amount of exercise people take because of the massive health benefits, from just generally, as well as obesity and so on. So that sets the framework for all the things that we've been doing around walking and cycling, promoting mass, more use of mass transit. But we know that there are still essential vehicle journeys that will need to be made to service the city. The people who cannot not use their vehicles, a vehicle, whether maybe they're a person with a disability, and so some car use and taxis and so on, which is why then we set the policies to say that those vehicles must be cleaned up as fast as possible, and including electrification. And we published over a year ago now a report convened a task force of industry experts, businesses, local communities, unions and so on, to look at the approach that we should be taking to support electric vehicle or electrification of our vehicles in London. And we're promoting more standard chargers so people can charge vehicles at home. Often these are people like delivery drivers who lease vehicles and then, park at home. We have car clubs. We have, I talked about the black taxis, the iconic ones in London going zero emission electric. So we've instituted a network of rapid charge hubs, nearly 300 now in London. We have about a quarter of the UK's electric charge network here, and we are working with businesses who are turning their fleets into electric fleets. Royal Mail, UPS, and many others. This is what we need. But you're right. But I think we're really clear. It has to be about getting people out of their cars, and the 15-minute city will encourage that sort of approach, that localized approach. We call it high streets for all, is absolutely clear, is the way of driving that.
Thank you. Heather, do you want to comment on that too, and maybe also bring the international perspective that it's electrification of vehicle fleet maybe is not the answer for everyone?
Sure. The transition to electric is not cheap. The lifetime over the lifetime of the vehicle, it does pay for itself, but it is an expensive transition. The upfront costs of the vehicles are more expensive. So for many cities around the world, that's a real limiting factor. Not to say that we shouldn't push for it, but it is a limiting factor. So I think the real thing to do is, where you're focusing on electrification, to focus on public fleets, like Shirley's mentioned, and buses, first and foremost, are really the place to focus for most cities around the world. You had asked about, Uber and other forms of taxis, but, in most cities around the world, the majority of people, pretty much all people, cannot afford an Uber or a taxi. They are either walking or cycling. The majority of people around the world walk or cycle, or are forced in public transportation. And when we think about these buses, they're often small buses. There are these mini buses, paratransit fleets that operate essentially independently as small businesses, often small franchises or cooperatives. They don't have the money to invest in electrification. They're also often using vehicles that have been passed down to them from other countries. So they're, second and third generation vehicles that wouldn't even be considered roadworthy in the cities that we've been talking about. And those are the vehicles that really need to be cleaned up, at least made to be the most efficient vehicles that we have in the world, if not electric. And I think that's really the place to focus. And there are examples of that kind of investment happening, of these small franchises being brought in and modernizing those informal paratransit fleets, helping them to establish better governance models, better business models, so that they can become businesses that can reap this benefit of the investment. And it's not only when we think about COVID and how do we make these public fleets safe and attractive. Of course, it's about the pollution of the vehicles, but it's other things. The more public transportation we have, the less risk we will have in crowding and overcrowding, and therefore they can be safe. We also need to invest in cashless fare systems where you use your a card or your mobile phone to get onto a vehicle rather than using cash. That, of course, avoids a lot of passing of virus and touching and such. And those sorts of investments, again, need the help of government to help these informal franchises come together, create better businesses so that they can get investment and have improvements too. And again, the bulk of the public around the world relies on these sorts of small fleets. So we really need to concentrate on those.
You just answered the question I was about to ask you, which is, yes, we know that public transportation is the answer, but how will you get people to get back into public transportation without fear? So you've given us some indications of how you do that by providing more public transportation so that there's less crowding. Is there anything else that you can suggest on how we reduce the fear of people in getting back into public transportation?
Well, I think it is, again, education, making more public transportation available so there's less crowding, making sure that the public understands what cleanliness procedures are taking place. I know many fleets around the world are cleaning their fleets much more often, sometimes after every route that is taken. And more fleets, but also investing in station design, thinking about the way transportation hubs are designed. So again, there's more space, there's more ventilation, there's less crowding. So to use an example with Transjakarta in Jakarta, Indonesia, that I mentioned earlier, all of their metro and bus rapid transit hubs are now connected. Most of them are above ground, and they've been investing in making sure that their new systems create a lot of space, that the connections are often outdoors, and filling the area with advertisements, which is another source of revenue, as well as just education for people so that they understand where the risk is truly coming from and what they can do to avoid it. I think another thing is to make services that serve neighborhoods much better. People are not using transportation because it is inconvenient, but if you can use these minibus services, like I was referring to before, to become feeder systems for the larger metro and bus corridors, it makes it a lot more convenient for people. Those smaller vehicles are often ones that they trust more because they're in their community, they're more direct routes that they're familiar with, and that just helps build trust. In Jakarta, we've seen that the ridership has remained kind of more steady than it has with other systems, just because I think there is that familiarity and there's that more direct service that people depend on and trust.
Thank you. I wanted to end this question and answer session with Rosamund, because Rosamund, I think many of us have been talking about the important role that campaigners have in advocacy and engaging with the public and engaging with politicians. Rosamund, could you tell us what you think it might have been your greatest victory, and what do you think made you effective? You're obviously tireless and keep on going, but what is it that can you give us an example to inspire all of us who want to be more effective in our advocacy?
I think it's talking to people in the neighborhoods we've been discussing. People don't like to feel as if things are being done to them. And maybe for me, they recognize me still as being one of them. I still live where I live. And I think solutions need to come with people in the communities. I've been listening to everything tentatively, very carefully. And there's the danger when we sit here now and discuss all these things academically, and the real world sometimes is slightly different from something that we may discuss in here. It sounds brilliant here, and when you then put it into practice, it doesn't always work. But people like to feel as if they are in control of where they live. So a piece of advice is to get the communities engaged, monitoring, maybe giving them some to monitor their own air pollution. It's very, very important that people don't think that these things are being done to them, and for people to understand what these communities are going through, because I'm not sure whether it was Heather, a lot of these communities are already suffering from air pollution. So they know the impacts and they suffer worse. So we have to make sure anything we do makes their lives better and not worse. If we want to bring people on board, and please get them involved. We shouldn't think that we have all the answers, and communicate with them and be empathetic, because COVID in my community, it has been worse compared to the national average, and people are genuinely worried. So it's getting an understanding of why people don't want to go on public transport. It's not that they don't want to, they are genuinely scared. But my thing is always engage with the community, and please don't think you have all the answers, because there are people in those communities who know what's best for the community. And be as honest, say to them you are doing this for their health, and hopefully they will engage with you. But an open dialogue is I have learned that this summer, it is very, very important.
Thank you so much, Rosamund, for your inspiring words. I think that's a good way to end this section. We'll move on in a minute. Just to recap on the various things that we've said, I think one of the key messages is that we do need to engage people, and we need campaigners. And in our form of engagement, we need to campaign in a way that's inclusive, that's caring, that's listening to others, and really is going out to the community and make sure that things are not done to people, but with people. And that's going to be necessary not only to engage people and make policies acceptable, but I think we also have said that we need to engage with politicians, because in the end, they're the ones who are going to be making things happen. To engage with the politicians, we need to engage with the community. So it's a bit of a catch-22, and I would love to have another hour to figure out how we get out of this catch-22, but I guess we'll, who knows, maybe we'll have some concluding remarks that can help us do that. I think we've also seen that, of course, transport has multiple effects on health. We've seen some really nice visions that were given to us on not only is it about transport and air pollution, but it's also physical activity. It's also social interaction. When we remove cars, we also have space for other uses of land uses, whether it's green space or public spaces, places for social housing. So we removing our car dependence so that the cars are taken more to the backstage and there's less prominent, provides many opportunities for much greater benefits. And of course, we've talked about electrification and low emission vehicles. And I think in a way, for some cities, that might be the low hanging fruit because it doesn't require as much engagement. So I'm sure Shirley wouldn't agree. I think it wasn't easy to get the ULEZ, the ultra low emission zone, implemented. But on the other hand, you're only asking people to drive a different kind of a car. Going the next step further might be a bit more challenging. And it's also probably the solution that's more adequate for some environments, some contexts where electrification is just a too high an investment anyway. So thank you so much. We've seen lots of different aspects of this systems thinking. It's been a fantastic conversation. And to finish, We now I will leave the floor to Nigel Topping and also Gonzalo Munoz, who is also the co-champion for COP26. And I will let them conclude and reflect on all of what they've heard, and maybe even contrast with what they've heard from the previous sessions on these climate change and health dialogues. Over to you two, Nigel and Gonzalo.
Well, Audrey, first of all, thank you so much for a really, really fantastic session. I mean, some of you know I've been a bit obsessed, and you know, we all bring our personal experience, right, to these dialogues and these challenges. And so I worked in the automotive industry, so my personal obsession is the electrification piece, because it's the bit that I understand most. And then I listened to Rosamund so eloquently talking about the need to give people a sense of controlling their own community, and that's a totally different piece of the puzzle, which is exactly the kind of what we wanted to do with these dialogues, is expose ourselves to the different perspectives that can help blast away some of our blind spots. And also some lovely examples of that sort of deep engagement, whether it's the school streets or the different ways of engaging and making people feel that they're part of the solution, not just top down, although that is needed as well. And Mark just talked about the massive investments that are needed. So thank you so much. So thank you also for lending us the last 10 minutes to try and wrap up the whole day. So Gonzalo and I are now going to just try and reflect on the whole day, which has been intense. It started with an adrenaline rush as the technology didn't quite work, with 10 minutes to go, 5 minutes to go, and we just launched on time. So I want to thank the World Health Organization, the Club of Rome, the Potsdam Institute, C40, and many other amazing partners. This really has been a radical collaboration the whole day. It's got us off to a great start. Really, really inspiring. I mean, Gonzalo, we've had an incredible first day. Gonzalo and I have been trying to be listening to as many of the dialogues as possible. We started with a great opening with the Club of Rome and the Potsdam Institute, with Sandrine Dixon de Cleve and Johan Rockström, highlighting the importance of systems thinking, because we're dealing with systems transformation, and this panel has really highlighted that as well. That's at the heart of what we're trying to do in the role that we hold, Gonzalo and I. I joined a session with Climate Chant to hear about amazing work of colleagues in 45 African countries, working to build sectoral pathways that are regionally and nationally relevant. Some work for us to follow up on with the Marrakesh Partnership. Throughout today, the global health community has come together to take stock of health and climate crisis, this nexus, and again, nowhere more evocative than in this issue of clean air, the air that our children are breathing. And Rosamund, thank you for helping try and get us down from the abstract of 7 million premature deaths to the image of children walking past gridlock. We've had, I think, a real emphasis on the importance of a healthy, equitable recovery. Mark shared some still shocking numbers about how little of the recovery money is going towards the transition so far. Let's hope that changes in the next 12 months. We've had NHS England, the largest single health system in the world, committed to reach net zero emissions by 2040. That's not new today, but that's very impressive. And actually consistently throughout the day, we've heard people saying 2050 is the minimum acceptable level of ambition. If it can be 2045 or 2040 or 2035, we've got to do it. That's the largest employer in Europe, and they're responsible for about 4 or 5% of England's carbon footprint. And today, Nick Watts, the Chief Sustainability Officer at NHS England, gave a detailed roadmap on how they plan to become the first net zero national health system. And I know they're calling on health systems around the world to join them. And just to prove how much climate action has been accelerating this year, this afternoon, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor in the UK, announced that the UK is intending to make climate disclosure mandatory for UK-based firms. That's based on the proposals that those of you who work in the finance sector will be familiar with, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, as early as 2025. And we know that the sunshine treatment, as those who work in the disclosure game call it, just like data. If you have data on air in your streets, you can do something about it. If you have no data, you're blind. Same thing if investors have data on the companies they're investing in. So that's a big step. But Gonzalo, how about you? I mean, I had hoped that you were going to be with us here in the UK, but now that we're on lockdown, and I know you've been up since about 5 o'clock in the morning, so we're just going to try something that's never been done before. Gonzalo, I think you must be really, really hungry. So I just wanted to just see if I can hand you a banana just to give you some sustenance to keep you going for the rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna eat it later. So far, I'm still healthy. The only casualty I have to say is that I forgot to wear my jacket. So when you appeared, I just remember that. So sorry for that. But it's really great to be here with you, my friend, in order to close this first day of the Race to Zero Dialogues. It has been a really fantastic day. Today, we were thrilled to announce that the Healthcare Climate Challenge from Healthcare Without Harm has become the Race to Zero healthcare partner to mobilize hospitals and health systems around the world to join the Race to Zero. That's the type of announcement, the type of things that we want to listen during these 2 weeks. They have gathered hundreds of commitments by hospitals and health centers to transition to 100% renewable electricity and become climate resilient. We've heard also from cities that they are also being mobilized massively to join the Race to Zero. Today, C40 cities, CDP, and the Global Covenant of Major announced a new partnership to mobilize 1,000 cities around the world to join the Race to Zero in time for COP26, the 2021 UNFCCC Conference of the Parties, and in collaboration with the Science Based Targets for Cities partners. We also saw today the launch of a new Pathfinder initiative led by researchers at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine with scientific oversight from the Lancet Pathfinder Commission. They're going to map healthy climate solutions, aiming to increase motivation and capacity by showing how the implementation of well-designed policies and technologies can yield multiple benefits for people and the planet. I'll hand it back to you while I enjoy my banana.
Wow, Gonzalo, I can't believe this is only day one. This really, there's a real strong sense of this momentum around the health and climate nexus building. It's been building for some time now. I think many of us who've been working on climate for a long time have been slow to see the nexus, and COVID's really accelerated that. And we now have a growing range of case studies that we can use to really implement best practice. I mean, today I heard from Dr. Maria Neira, who you may remember when we launched the Race to Zero, told us to really focus on health. Talking about the World Health Organization's recent launch of 6 prescriptions and a long list of actionable ideas for a healthy and green recovery from COVID, which Mark was talking about. And that's been supported by an open letter by over 40 million health professionals. So those same health professionals have been at the front line of dealing with COVID, are calling on G20 leaders to put public health at the center of their recoveries. And of course, we know that the UK is chairing the G7 meetings next year, and Italy, the co-host with the UK of the COP, is hosting the G20. So hopefully there'll be some real climate leadership in both of those. We also heard some amazing examples. We heard from small island developing states. Those of you who've never been to one of these conferences, the small island developing states in Paris were chanting 1.5 to stay alive. These are countries who are literally drowning, literally going underwater as a result of climate change. So they're really ramping up the way they tackle climate change and health simultaneously. And also really exciting to hear some of the very practical initiatives from young people. 2 initiatives from youth organizations who've created their own platforms to engage with the energy sector. We heard about 2 new energy initiatives run by the Global Youth Energy Outlook and Youth Sustainable Energy Hub. And it's great to see that all that energy and that creativity being turned into practical action. Back to you, Gonzalo.
Well, I was also, let's say, quite not only impressed but moved by how much health also intersects with so many other parts of the decarbonization puzzle, including, of course, transport, as we were listening right before, finance and nature-based solutions. And it was great to see partners exploring those interlinkages today. The race to zero definitely is a race towards zero harm. We saw new WHO guidance today, for example, on mainstreaming biodiversity to support healthier and more sustainable diets, and mayors sharing how they are reimagining their cities in a way that improves public health, reduces inequality, and addresses the climate crisis. I was also quite moved by the idea that Kate Rayworth brought. Like, it's so evident that it's not only about zero as a target. Zero is a passing point towards regeneration. So we have 9 days exploring specific pathways. They're not running in isolation. They're running together towards net zero. As Sandrine Dixon-DeCleve and Kate as well said so clearly this morning in the opening session, it's not just about sectors in isolation like the energy sector, but about shifting to a circular economy and creating a just and equitable society. So tomorrow we're looking forward to leaders from the industry, from governments and civil society coming together to mobilize very concrete actions on how to accelerate the net zero industry transition. So with that, thank you everyone for watching, and see you all tomorrow for our next Race to Zero dialogue.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you, Nigel. I do think, I hope it's not a race to just zero harm, but much more than that, and a race to health promotion in cities and healthy cities. And I have to tell you that now there is still, it's not the end. At 8 o'clock British time, the GMT, there will be another session on financing and a healthy and resilient climate future. So I hope you get to attend that. I'm going to go back to my screening kisses for me. So thank you again, all of you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.